Hello and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Elizabeth and Mike discuss an article called Damage Done, a Mandate to Demolish America's Progress Towards a More Perfect Union, which serves as a platform for a conversation on how the current administration are gutting American institutions, betraying its allies, and that the Republican Party can no longer be considered conservative in any meaningful sense.
Hello, welcome back to the Dissidents Podcast.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I was expecting you to start because you always do. It's Mike back.
It is, yes. I can start if you like. Hold on, let me just pull up the article. I just realized I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah.
Where are we? World Affairs. Here we go. Okay, so we are looking at an article from World Affairs, The Damage Done, a Mandate to Demolish America's Progress Towards a More Perfect Union. But I think we're talking about this really in the context of something much wider. I mean, I don't know if the podcast is really going to focus that much on the article because it relates to so much that we can see happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, there are 5 sections in the article, and I do think it's worth trying to touch on each section as we talk through stuff. I chose this article and sent it to you in part because you had sent me an email, and and I missed you, and so I said, let's talk about this article. This article is sort of about Project 2025. I mean, it's about a lot of other things, but it really is, talking about Project 2025, and how aspects of it are, being realized even as we speak. But there's also some sections in here, you're much more politically aware and knowledgeable than I am, that I don't necessarily know enough about the history to I'm taking him at his face value on a lot of things, and he may in fact have some things wrong, or you may have some nuance that you want to add. I mean, he starts out with, he sets a little, sets the stage, with, Mike Norquist saying, my goal is to cut government in half in 25 years to get it down to the size where we can drown it in the bathtub. And that's sort of setting the stage for, for the article here. A few other quotes. But, basically then he is talking about Hitler and Mussolini employing these kinds of techniques with great success for a while.
I mean, well, let's talk about what he's alleging, and then let's look at the historical parallels, because I think there's actually a better one than the one he states. Not necessarily better, but much more recent. So his argument is that governments or strongmen, political strongmen, so dictators, authoritarians, will use corruption. They will often point at legitimate corruption that really happens, and they will use that as a pretext to gutting systems, so kicking out all kinds of people in the system. Now, kicking out the genuinely corrupt officials. Yes, the authoritarians did kick out genuinely corrupt officials that probably should have been kicked out, but it doesn't stop there. Right, this isn't a scalpel. This is a chainsaw, and it's quite funny because when the Argentinian president Milei arrived in Washington a couple of weeks back, and he met Elon Musk, and Elon Musk was uploading this video to Twitter and putting it all over the place. What he gave him was a chainsaw.
Yes,
that was the present, and that's the metaphor. So we're not talking about a scalpel. We're not talking about let's have a due process that is careful. Let's make sure that we give people, a chance to defend themselves. Again, a sense of due process. Let's just cut the whole thing up.
Well, it's basically, sort of like a Thanos thing, right? Like, because
Hmm
just snap our fingers and half are gone. Random half.
Yeah, and the best example of this would be Xi Jinping recently. So the Communist Party remains, but was even more so then, this really big, bloated institution in a way like that no real American institutions are as bloated as that. And what he did is he would again point to legitimate examples of corruption, and then he would use that as a basis to getting rid of first the corrupt people in the party, and then second anybody who opposed him.
Right. Anybody you
And
don't like.
and then what you do, the next thing you do is you fill the system up with yes men, and you select. You end up not picking people for competence, right?
Correct.
Or at least if you are picking for competence, you're picking for people who are good at flattery, who are good at telling you what you want to hear. And the end result is that it is an absolute catastrophe for the country. I mean, China now is in economic ruin. I mean, I've been saying that this was coming for years here. I think that it's pretty much known now, I think, that China is in complete economic ruin and there's nothing that they can do about it. Another example would be Putin in Russia, if you want to call it Russia. I mean, I still think it's the Soviet Union, personally. But what he did was to purge anybody in the system who he thought could be a threat to him. So that would be people who spoke out against him, yes, but also people who he thought, had something going for them. Somebody who maybe didn't speak out against him, but if this person accrues enough power, maybe then they will start to speak out against me. And so there was a complete purge of the Russian military. And that's one of the reasons why the war in Ukraine, they bungled the war in Ukraine as badly as they have and continue to bungle. I mean, they're still not doing particularly well. I mean, there are some people who are saying that they're gaining ground. Yeah, well, they're gaining ground, but they're not gaining very much. And they're gaining it at immensely, lopsided losses. So that's the principle here. What he's trying to allege, what is a little bit more difficult to prove, is whether this is something deliberate on behalf of Trump and Musk.
So the author Brunello.
What he seems to be implying,
right.
Is that this is so. He's going to talk about the Heritage Foundation, and yes, you're talking about people within the conservative. Well, again, we're going to use air quotes for conservative, right?
Yeah.
Because they're it's the opposite of conserve, right? Because they're really taking the chainsaw to things. So that's conservative in name only.
Right.
So, you can see people arguing for this, things like Project 2025 would be the obvious example. But, is Trump aware of that? Is Trump processing this on an ideological level? Does he think I can get rid of my enemies by engaging in this process? Or is somebody else pushing him down? Or is this just something he's doing?
Well, is this about, I mean, he said, I am your retribution, I'm going to, certainly, I don't think there's much evidence that he's actually thinking about the country.
No.
I mean, so I don't see evidence of that. Again, then, as, the author, talks about in part 2, he's talking about the end of a more perfect union. So that Project 2025 aims to end any dreams of a diverse and multicultural democracy. A primary aim is to, in quotes, dismantle the administrative state. We certainly hear that a lot. But the Project 2025 document is instructions for capturing the state and dominating its institution on behalf of an ideology. And that's sort of what you're talking about. It's like it's not dismantle. I mean, they're building a different administrative state. So you're still going to have to follow our rules. And look, you and I have talked about the left a lot. And the right is doing, the first thing they did was exactly the same thing that the left had been doing. We're going to police speech. We're going to, we're going to tell you what you can and can't teach on campuses. We're going to tell you what kind of research, what kind of research you can do, or what kind of findings you can publish. We're going to, take down certain words on websites. Now, they're doing it differently. They're doing it, but it's even the same words. Before, you couldn't say gender. You couldn't say sex. You had to say gender. And now you're not allowed to say gender. You have to say sex. And it's like, look, it's a similar playbook. In terms of some of the rhetoric that we're hearing,
let me make it even more crystal clear. I mean, I have been in debates recently with some very, very, very prominent people on the right. I mean, really millions of followers, that kind of influence, who are openly saying, yeah, look, we don't like the left, we don't like what they stand for, but we are taking that playbook. They're quite open about it. It would be naive for us not to take their playbook.
Right.
We are taking their playbook, and we are going to use all of the tactics that they used. We're going to try and be just as good, if not better than they were at them. Except we're going to use it to implement and they're explicit about this, implement white identitarianism.
Mm-hmm.
And these were people, by the way, some of these people, before, when I didn't speak to them before, right? Because they were just raging against woke, and they were correct in everything they said. Their critiques were nuanced. There were, great critiques of wokeness. And then a lot of them would claim to be liberal, and they would be able to explain just what is great about liberalism, again, very eloquently. And then the next thing they would do is they would go ahead and do what we did would be to predict the, right-wing authoritarian backlash that would come. They would say that this is probably inevitable. And they would say also, these are all the very many various ways in which it's going to be absolutely awful. So they would predict it and say that it would be awful. And now it's come about, and again, they acknowledge that it's come about. They're eagerly participating in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Enthusiastically participating in it. I mean, it's frightening. So they've gone from being people who would debate Nazis, who would, get angry with Nazis, get angry with white identitarianisms, and now they are literally openly embracing white identitarianism. I mean, the classic example I had recently, I was debating somebody who argued that if you were born in the UK, if you were born in England specifically, but you were black and, your parents could have been here for generations, your parents, your grandparents, they're all black, none of them are Anglo-Saxon, you can't call yourself English, you're not English. What?
Right.
It's hard to unpack how wrong that statement is. I mean, like, from a psychologist's point of view, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're not going to, because I'm not. If a child is Caucasian and is raised in Japan and maybe has one Caucasian parent, or two Caucasian parents, but is in Japanese culture all of the time, they're not going to be culturally English, they'll be culturally Japanese.
Right.
Because culture doesn't go through the genes like blonde hair and blue eyes do, right? It just doesn't work that way. And that's so fucking obvious. And then they're like, oh, but they might not think of themselves as Japanese. Maybe they don't. They'd still be culturally Japanese. Like, they wouldn't be able to do anything about it. It's completely ridiculous. And yet these arguments are being made as if there's something enlightened about them, as if we're literally getting at blood and soil.
Right.
Um,
And so he talks about, we've heard this, I mean, the great replacement theory, about, and this, sort of, um, uh, he's talking about Norris and Englehart's cultural backlash, Trump, Brexit, and authoritarian populism. It says, our theory argues that a culturally silent revolution has heightened polarization over cultural issues. But
so
they say when authoritarian values and populist rhetoric are translated into public policies, the key issue concerns the need to defend us through restrictions on them, justifying restrictions on like immigrants and that kind of thing.
So what I don't think he does a good job here is, not that he's wrong, but he doesn't do a good job of really explaining what the ideological narrative is here, right? So the right-wing version of the Great Replacement theory isn't just these immigrants are coming over here and they're going to replace us. It's there's more to it than that. So what it is it's this idea that immigrants, the classic example, the one that blew up recently on Twitter was Indian Americans. So a lot of the MAGA woke right really hate Vivek Ramaswamy. They hate him. And they hate him because he's Indian. And the justification for that is this. These Indians will move over to the United States. They will be given good jobs by white people who are not forming an in-group of white people, right? So they are white people, but their in-group is multiracial. But the people who they are giving jobs to on the basis of merit will form racial in-groups. And then in turn, when they get into those positions of power, then they will hire only Indians and disadvantage white people. So therefore, it is necessary that it is, the more nuanced of them would say it's sad, but it's necessary that we white people have to start forming ethnic in-groups. Otherwise, we are going to be replaced in our societies. The more kind of full-on people would say it was stupid that we thought that we could do anything else other than form ethnic in-groups. Right. I mean, what are you're unbelievably naive. This is the way it should be. This is the way it always has been in history. And then the next level is, okay, so who is orchestrating these Indians to come into the United States? Any guess?
I presume. What?
Can you guess who is orchestrating the in-groups?
Well, I presume the left.
No, the Jews.
Left. Oh, well, I was going to mention that because the description that you were giving with that's basically, in psychology, that's basically the same sort of, remember we talked about the stereotype content model, and sort of the same quadrant that you were describing. Indians would be described, that's how many people would describe Jews. So they describe them as cold but competent. And yep. So, and when people sort of put them in that category, you respect the competent, but then when you're given an opportunity to aggress against that group in some way, people will do it, right? So they're harboring resentment against that group. And so when there's an opportunity, then they might strike. So,
So, I mean, to look at some of the stuff that, again, this is coming from big, famous, I hate to use the word, but, intellectuals in the UK. I've heard some of them come out with stuff like, I feel guilty when I'm eating curry. Okay. I've stopped eating curry, they'll say, because curry is moral slop and you can't trust the people who are making it. Like, what food practices? They're unclean people. I mean, again, they're talking about Indians and Pakistanis, obviously, right? This kind of stuff is becoming permissible. We've got this shift in the Overton window,
right,
towards outright racism being completely permissible.
Yeah,
and it's really shocking. It's really, 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 really shocking. Now,
and this author does talk about, everybody's doing it now, right? Talking about the Red Scare, talking about McCarthy era in the 1950s, and, sort of now this author, and I don't know what you think about this, but he's talking about how that's when sort of Christian fundamentalism started to creep in. I don't know what you think. I don't know enough about. I don't know enough about religion, but I don't know enough about it. About when. So he's saying President Eisenhower quietly invited a politicized form of Christian fundamentalism into the conservative alliance. And so he's talking about here how, Jerry Falwell then in the 1970s,
Mm-hmm.
And, Ronald Reagan, and this author is saying they recognize that racial segregation through though a compelling issue among conservatives was becoming increasingly distasteful. So it was becoming less and less okay to talk about racial issues. Something with stronger moral bona fides was required, and abortion was selected. So this author is saying that up until that point, really, religion kind of stayed out of abortion. That this was, and of course, we know that that a Catholic, Catholics and a Catholic physician was actually really involved in creating the birth control pill,
Mm-hmm.
because it was a natural sort of form of, it's like, it wasn't birth control. It was, regulating the body so that it would conform with Catholicism, and then Catholicism eventually rejected it. They accepted it and then rejected it. So, yeah, I don't know what you think about this
I think
religion piece.
I think it's a bit one-sided, and I think I see this maybe clearer than an American would because I'm English. But from an outsider looking into American politics, there is a puritanical streak on both the right and the left. A very, very puritanical streak.
Mm-hmm.
Wokeness is kind of strikes me as Christianity, like an extreme kind of weird twisting of puritanical Christianity. It is very puritanical, right?
Yeah, and many have made that argument.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just me.
Right.
So I would just add that. I would just say that
Mm-hmm.
there is, again, I'm not contradicting him. I'm just saying that there is a puritanical threat on both sides. I mean, he does seem to, like, throughout the article, he does seem to kind of glaze over the excesses of the left.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe that's fair enough, because maybe he'd say, well, that's not what I'm writing my article about. I'm talking about the right. Doesn't mean that I didn't think those things, but
can't be everything to in this art. Can't be everything to everybody in this article.
No, yeah.
So, and he does mention Viktor Orban, which is, of course, the playbook, right, for Trump's administration. American lawyers helped Viktor Orban to build. He was elected. He then lost. Was there like a 10-year period almost where he and then he got reelected? But in the meantime, they did some things, got some things started in terms of the courts and education, and allowed then. So when he got reelected many years later, then everything was sort of in place. And I think, doesn't he call Hungary an illiberal democracy? Isn't that what he calls it?
Does he?
Illiberal, I think. Yeah. So, but those same lawyers that orchestrated that are working with Trump. They're American lawyers, and they worked with Viktor Orban, and they're working with Trump now. And I can't, it's like you see the parallels, right? I mean, he took over the universities. And so you either Orban did, you either agree to let him run his, people that he appoints to run the university, or, you don't get any funding at all. And, even, some schools have just picked up and left because they couldn't do anything there. So, a few schools have remained independent, but basically they're run now by people that Viktor Orban has chosen. So they teach and do research on what Viktor Orban says is okay, and that's
The other example,
they don't have any top universities in that country at
Erdogan
all.
did exactly the same thing in Turkey. I have a friend who is a Turkish academic, and not a crazy left winger, like not at all. Fairly moderate guy, and then in engineering as well, right? So not in political science or anything like that.
Right.
Engineering, and he had to get out basically, because the universities in Turkey had been completely taken over and dominated in exactly the same way.
And that's kind of where we're heading, right? So
Yep.
we cut off, Trump cut off what, $400 million worth to Columbia,
Yeah.
cutting off Columbia University, not Columbia, Columbia University,
Not the country,
yeah,
although that too probably with USA.
Exactly. There have been several other schools as well. The entire state of Maine, because the governor of Maine stood up to him over an issue, and she basically said, "I'll see you in court." So the entire state of Maine is cut off. And basically, so here's another thing that he says about religion. The result was a tenacious march to define real Americans as Christian and government as good when it serves the purposes of Christian capital and tradition, and evil when it serves diversity, equality, multilateral perspectives on American global power. So I do see, and Matt, friend of ILV and friend of the podcast, and I did a podcast on an article that really touched me, which was that the sort of the mistake that we make in demonizing Trump. And the author's point was that when we demonize, we dehumanize, we turn away, we don't want to look, we don't want to process, we just we're willing to harm sometimes people that we've dehumanized. We certainly don't engage, and that means engage our minds also. But what I'm seeing also, I shouldn't say but, I'm seeing those same things where now those same demonizations, it's sort of who's the one from the Lord of the Rings with
Gollum.
I've lost Gollum. It's like this sort of like they're just like enjoying what they're doing like so much that they're just like they're this like kind of like icky sort of like I hope kind of obsession with routing out the whatever and a dehumanization of the people that they're that they're just cut the appendages they're cutting off with a chainsaw. Just a complete dehumanization of people that are losing their jobs. My sister's a grants accountant, so she works at a university. She works on federal grants, and she lost her job last month. So universities are cutting off hiring. They're, this is just a CPA, just an accountant. She's just an accountant at a university. She's not administering DEI stuff, but because grants have DEI like in them, then somehow the accountant, is, part of the problem, I guess. So
yeah, and it's worth pointing out like how Bolshevik this whole process really is, like how much it has how it has much more in common, for example, with a very left-wing Russian revolution than it does anything that would be could possibly be called conservative, right? It's even the same language, like the same justifications. So you talk to these right-wing people, you talk to the more intelligent, the more cerebral of them, the ones that aren't sending me death threats every single day and calling me gay and trying to turn the kids gay even though I'm straight as an arrow and have married with 2 kids. The ones that can actually think, and what they'll say is they'll say this: look, what happened to people like your sister is really unfortunate, and I admit maybe some of these firings might not have been necessary, But we have to make these changes right now in order to get to this kind of utopia that we're building towards, right? You know, the revolutionaries always come out with this. Oh, what a shame, you know, somebody lost their job. Oh, well, that's regrettable, but unfortunately we don't have the time. We're charging on full steam ahead to our revolution, and if we don't do these difficult things now, then it will never happen. And you know, and this is the same rhetoric they always come. There's nothing about that as conservative. A conservative approach would be carefully, okay, let's take stock. Let's look at America. Okay, let's put our problems to one side just for the moment. You know, maybe things are getting worse, but let's just put that to the... Even if things are getting worse and continue to get worse, you know, America is still in a pretty good place in terms of its economy, in terms of its farmland. Its demographics aren't even that bad compared to most other, you know, developed countries. Wow. How do we conserve that, first of all? And then once we've thought about how do we conserve that, then we can start to gently start playing with the institutions in order to improve them. You know, you could even, doesn't mean you can't do dramatic things like fire people like Claudine Gay or something like that, right? You could do that if you wanted. But what you shouldn't, well, no, because that would be one change. That would be a small change, right? A small but highly symbolic change within institutions. That's completely conservative. But what you wouldn't start doing is start saying, like, you know, the Thanos thing. Like taking a chainsaw to things. If you can take out Claudine Gay with a scalpel. You don't need to start like completely gutting institutions in the way that they're doing. And you know, again, to re-emphasize the conservative point, this was Edmund Burke's specific warning, right? In the Reflections on the Revolutions in France, right? He was saying you got all these institutions in France, and yeah, there are problems, and you know these Jacobins might be correct in pointing out some of these problems, but if you gut all of the institutions of the state, especially when that's being done, and this is essentially a quote, being done by people who have no experience in running a state, then it's going to be an absolute disaster.
A 20-something-year-old who calls himself Big Balls on social media.
Yeah, and look, I'm sure the guy has got a super high IQ. I'm sure he's highly intelligent. But if you haven't got a degree of maturity, an experience in politics or running a state, I mean, even if it's from the outside in, you know, even if it just means you're a commentator or you've read a lot about it, I mean, even that would be useful. But at 20 years old, you're not going to have that.
Yeah.
No, you're not. Not even a remarkable 20-year-old would have that. Might go on to develop it, but they wouldn't have it. And Elon Musk, again, running a business, brilliant. I'm sure that you could take Musk and he could transform businesses because he spent his life doing that. That's what he's good at, right? But going to government institutions and bureaucracies, you've got a fucking clue what you're doing. No clue.
Well, look, I mean, the best, you know, money savings would be just to cut all the money that the government gives him. And so we'd be, you know, he doesn't need it, right?
No.
He doesn't need the money. So why doesn't look, if he's so moralistic about, you know, saving the government money, why doesn't he just not take any more? I mean, you know, if he thinks if he thinks it's a crime for people like my sister to be, you know, working at an accounting job, because she might you know, run across a grant that includes, you know, diversity in the grant. You know, I mean, he could do a lot for the government, for our monetary situation by just never taking another cent from the government. Yeah. So what do you think about this argument historically? So by starving the government for tax dollars, conservatives are seeking to break down confidence in institutions. So this idea of, like, I think you had talked about like the IRS. So we fire a bunch of people from the IRS. We close the IRS down. Guess what? The IRS now, you know, so taxes are due in a month, right? Our annual federal and state taxes. And so they don't process them, things. And then the idea is to make people madder, right? You, you know, interfere with the postal service. You interfere with Social Security. You know, in this, you know, sort of lopping off of appendages and everything, it makes the government look more useless than before. And so that's going to spur more enthusiasm for Trump's administration. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's what they hope. I don't think it's going to work out.
I mean, hasn't
So
it worked in other countries where people then, they turn against one another, right? And they start to engage in, they start to, engage in bribery and sort of mafia kind of tactics and stuff
so
in order to.
yeah, I mean, so one of the arguments that I'm seeing like pop up on Twitter right now, because I'm kind of seeing these things before they come out, but I'm going to make a prediction. Paying more for products is patriotic.
Mm.
So in other words, the damage that is being done by society is just going to be justified as part of the, the remit. Will it work? I mean, like, it's hard to say.
It has worked, right?
So,
Historically.
trying to think of an example of when it's worked, when a government has destroyed its own bureaucracy, things have collapsed, and then the government has got away with it. In France, yes, but only at the cost of extreme bloodshed. In China, under Mao did pretty much all of that. Millions of people starved to death. Soviet Union too. They had starvation when the government started basically gutting all of its institutions. Now those organizations stayed in power. Those governments stayed in power, but it didn't work insofar as none of them managed to make things better.
Right. Yeah. I guess that's not what I meant by worked. What I
Yeah.
meant was that
Will they stay
people
in? Will people support
supported the
them?
government in some ways, or they went along with
I mean,
it for a while.
so well, yeah, they did, and yes, I mean, there was no counter revolution in the Soviet Union or France, but the only reason for that was because it didn't just stop at the gutting of institutions, right? In order for the government to remain out of blame, the government had to say, "Oh, it's not us. The reason why things are bad is because there's still capitalists in the system, and we're going to have to purge them. We're going to have to." And if you read Solzhenitsyn, the Gulag Archipelago, that book is essentially all about the weird and funny and unusual ways that the government made up reasons to process people into the gulags because it needed to, not because those people were actually doing anything bad, but because the Soviet Union wasn't working. And the reason it wasn't working was because the Soviet system was fundamentally crap, but they couldn't admit that, right? They needed to blame people, and so that's what they did. And that again, you had the struggle sessions in Maoist China. Same thing happened. In the French Revolution, famously people were guillotined for the same reason. So you transfer that process onto America. How is Trump going to sustain this? Because none of this is going to work. Like,
Right. It's not going to improve the country.
It's going to be a disaster, just like it was everywhere else.
Right.
So, does Trump have the capacity? Or Trump and his kin have the capacity to then blame everybody else apart from themselves and start to punish those people, like the Soviets did with anybody who they thought they could invent an allegation
Well, they're
against.
definitely trying to do that.
But I mean,
so
what he would need. So what's going to happen? Is the American economy is going to fall apart. It already is. Things are going to get a lot worse in the United States. Lots and lots more people are going to lose their jobs. That's going to have a massive hit on spending. If he goes through with tariffs in the way that he's threatening to, the prices of groceries, especially with Canada and Mexico, right, where you import a lot of your agricultural products, the prices of groceries is going to rise dramatically. Combine that with inflation and incomes going down or being eliminated. So the situation for Americans is going to get a lot worse, especially amongst the poorest Americans, which ironically are often the people who voted for Trump. So then at that point, Trump is going to probably blame the elites in society, I imagine. Blame the European Union.
Well, they're already calling it the Biden recession,
which it isn't.
But people, it's cognitive dissonance, right? It's like, well, I voted for him, so I can't blame him.
Well, yeah, I mean,
there's going to be some of that.
See, you remember Carl Sagan? Carl Sagan in The Demon Haunted World came up with this wonderful quote where he said, one of history's sad lessons is this: once you give a charlatan power over your identity, you almost never get it back. And I get this on my wall, like, all the time. People who are, no, this movie, it looks like a disaster right now, but actually it's 4D chess.
Yeah, the 4D chess thing, that's, I hear that.
So, but to answer your question, the short answer is no. I don't think it will work in America. I don't think Trump can successfully shift the blame onto the Democrats or the bureaucracy. I think eventually the blame is going to fall upon him. And then when it does, I don't think that he is going to have enough control over American society to start implementing the kind of bloodshed that would be needed to keep him in power. Like somebody in the Soviet Union. I just think Americans' institutions are too strong for that. He's trying. You're right. He's gutted the military. Which is worrying. So he's getting rid of people in the military and appointing yes men into the military, which is very worrying. But no, I don't think it will be successful.
So this is relevant to a quote from Kissinger. People who have become accustomed to stability can't bring themselves to believe what is happening when forced with a revolutionary power, and are therefore ineffective in opposing it. So have we been sort of lulled into, a false sense of security, believing that our democracy will hold, that our institutions will hold, and, are we just basically too ineffective to push back against this?
I mean, it's too early to say. But no, I think American democracy will hold. I think American democracy will... The United States will be okay. But this is the first time I've been worried about the United States in my life. Like, I didn't imagine that Trump would be... I mean, I thought he'd be awful, but I didn't imagine he'd be as bad as he actually is this time around. Threatening war with Canada? What?
I know.
Putting tariffs on your... Mexico is an absolutely key trading partner for the United States. And Trump last time round understood that.
Well, yeah, I mean, he issued tariffs the last time, but then basically everybody, look, big corporations filled out paperwork and got a pass on it. Now, small organizations, smaller companies, smaller shipping and everything, they got screwed. But, big organizations could fill out, special paperwork and stuff. But he still then tried to take credit for, having instituted tariffs. So maybe you can help me. I don't understand. I'm putting you on the spot here.
Okay.
I don't understand the terms neoliberalism, neoconservatism.
Okay. So...
Is that too hard?
No, it's not. All right. So neoliberalism... Well, the thing that's difficult about neoliberalism is being a neoliberal is rather like being a philosopher. You never really call yourself a neoliberal, right? Nobody who... Neoliberalism is something that you are accused of being, right?
Okay.
somebody who is accused of being a neoliberal would be somebody who believes in a returning to classical liberal values. And this is why I don't call myself a classical liberal as well, right? Because I don't want to return to classical liberal values. So if you think about the kind of economy that you had in the British Empire in the 19th century, that would be the kind of liberal ideology that they want to move towards, right? So you remove things like social security, you remove government intervention in the economy, or at least you keep it to an absolute minimum, right? So you're moving away from this kind of like liberalism of, let's say, the 50s and 60s, where you start to implement things like social security and there's more government spending in public education, things like that. And you take that away, you say that all of that's completely inefficient. You know, they do have a point, because often it is inefficient, right? Let's strip all of that away and let's go back to a much more 19th century, in the modern era, if you like, way of conducting a government. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right, so that's what the neoliberalism is. The neoconservatism has that outlook in economics, but then it goes over into foreign policy, where a neoconservative, neocon as they're often called, would be kind of like a hawkish view on American politics. So Trump would not be a neocon, for example, because he's isolationist. Neocon in foreign policy would be George Bush, senior and junior, right? And I again, neocon is something that people say about you rather than something you say about yourself.
Okay.
When I have my issues with because I'm more of a traditional conservative, in the sense that I'm not necessarily in favor of intervention in countries. Like, I wouldn't be in favor of a military intervention in Iraq, for example, because the neoconservative look on Iraq would be, okay, let's turn this into a democracy. You know, we have these universal values that work everywhere. They're the American values. There might be slight differences between Britain and America, but they're basically the same values. So we, Britain and America, are going to go into Iraq. We're going to remove a dictator. And once we've done that, we're going to believe that a liberal democracy is going to flourish in that place. Because why wouldn't it? You know, the values that underpin liberal democracy are universal. I wouldn't agree with that, because I would say that and as you know, that I would say that societies have to evolve those values.
Yeah, you can't just look at it and say, okay, go for it.
Well, I mean, that's what happened in Gaza, right? You said, okay, all these values are universal. Let's give them a liberal democratic framework, and they hold their elections and they elect Hamas, because Hamas is the articulation of Palestinian values. And then what does Hamas do? It goes and kills a load of Israelis in horrible ways and brings upon the Gazans an absolutely apocalyptic war and loads of suffering and death that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't have been given a liberal democratic values. I mean, you know, these kind of Saddam Hussein strongmen unfortunately are sometimes necessities in these countries, and that, you know, these countries, if they have to evolve liberalism, they have to grow up in a way. However, if you look at a country, so that's why that would be a difference between a neocon who would invade somewhere like that, and a more traditional conservative like myself wouldn't. But then I would look at someone like Ukraine and say, well, okay, there's an example of a society that has held elections, that governments have transitioned into and out of power, not without problems, granted. But it is a country that's quite clearly yearning for liberal democracy and freedom after the British and American model. So that would be why I would support intervention or helping Ukraine out, if you like. So does that answer your question, what neoliberal and neoconservative are, and how they're different from liberal and conservative?
Because he was using the terms. Yeah, he was using the terms in this article, and I was
I mean, left-wing people tend to use the terms neoliberal and neocon as pejoratives,
right?
And they tend to use them in a very reductionist way, rather than kind of understanding the nuanced position behind them.
So so he's in this section, he's talking about neoliberalism and neoliberalism undermining, sort of the political economy. He's talking about how neoliberalism, sort of went for the sort of U.S. outsourcing of prisons, of the health
Right.
system, of hospitals.
Right.
Let's privatize things. We're going to privatize stuff, and and now we've lost the power of oversight when that
Right.
happens. So things fall apart. So here in Massachusetts, a whole bunch of hospitals closed their doors. So a super rich person who has like however many jets and 5 yachts and stuff just sort of sailed off into the ocean and said bye and quit paying the bills. They couldn't. They didn't have the basic supplies to serve people. People were dying, and this is in liberal Massachusetts, where a string of hospitals got privatized, and this is what happens. Now they're closed. Now those people have no hospital nearby.
So this is it's easier for me to put it in British terms than American terms. So Thatcher and Reagan, because they were around at the same time and they had a very, very similar worldview, leaned towards privatization, especially in the UK. Thatcher leaned towards privatization that was considered by many members of the Conservative Party to be radical. And so they would have said, okay, well, we can experiment with privatization, and privatization maybe is a good idea here, here, and here, but we have to be careful about it. It has to be a gradual thing. It can't all be done at once, right? Because if we do that, then we're going back into this kind of French Revolution thing, right? The more radical the change, the greater the danger is that it's going to have negative consequences. And so it was actually Conservative peers, so literally Lord this, Lady that, in the then hereditary House of Lords in the United Kingdom, the aristocracy, that pushed back against the extremes of Thatcherism in the UK because it was too radical. So that's the break between neoliberalism on the one hand and traditional conservatism. There's a famous picture was done of then a few years, 20 years ago or something like that, of all the serving conservative all the conservative prime ministers that were still alive then at the time, and it was a famous conservative prime minister called Edward Heath, and after him came Margaret Thatcher, and they're trying to organize the picture, and Thatcher said to Heath, "Ted, you should stand to my right," and Heath famously responded, "That would be difficult, my dear." So yeah, I mean, there are differences between liberal. Liberal would generally mean liberal how you would understand it. So that's okay, we have some limited intervention, government intervention, healthcare, social sector. Neoliberal would kind of reject that and say the markets can sort everything out.
Right.
And then neoconservative is usually married to a neoliberal economic outlook, but is very interventionist. Trump would look neoliberal in economics, but he's very isolationist, or at least appears to be right now. I mean, who knows where he'll be next week?
Yeah, I'm not sure he's got any moral compass or
no. So where I think Trump, the reason why I think Trump would be leaning neoliberal, although I don't think he knows what neoliberalism is in a pejorative sense or in a kind of nuanced ideological sense either. He's not read Friedman and Hayek or anything like that. What he will have come up against, though, as a businessman in the United States of America, is bureaucratic red tape. And he will have a keen understanding that bureaucratic red tape has prevented him from making as much money as he wanted. He would want to make more money, right, and he would have been unable to do because of bureaucratic red tape. And he will see it from that perspective, And look, maybe he's right. Maybe some of this red tape is too much and it should be trimmed here and here and here. From a conservative point of view, that's fine. but he won't be seeing it from a conservative point of view because, again, he's not a conservative. So he's a radical. So it will be, let's take the chainsaw to it, and you will be unaware that, okay, I've made this positive change insofar as companies are not faced with this restriction and therefore can make more money. Wonderful. But then there are a cascade of negative effects that are often greater, right, than the single positive effect that you've just changed. That a lot of these rules are there for a reason.
Right. Yeah. And it's easy. I mean, we've said, it's so easy to criticize and to tear things down, but it's pretty hard to build things. And
right, I mean, like J.R.R. Tolkien, the famous author of Lord of the Rings, when we talked about Gollum once already, but he said that evil cannot create anything; it can only destroy. And that's what I think this regime is. I mean, I think I'm not saying that Trump is evil insofar as he's kind of satanic figure, but he's stupid, and stupid is often synonymous with evil, and it's destructive. It's stupid and destructive, which is what evil is by nature.
Yeah, being manipulated by some smarter people.
By Russians. I mean, absolutely. I mean, look, you have the president of the United States of America parroting Russian propaganda. I was in conversation. Is he doing it willfully? Does he know? Is the Kremlin? No, probably not. Although I'm not ruling that out, to be clear. I'm really not ruling that out. But I would say, no, I'd say 95% sure that he's not doing that. But Russian...
one of the ways that we know this is because he says stupid stuff all the time that that he just heard earlier. Somebody made a joke, and in the green room or whatever, somebody made a joke and other people laughed. And so he's like, "Ooh, I don't know what that means, but it got a laugh." So then he goes out on stage and says it, and it's completely inappropriate. And he doesn't know that it's inappropriate. I mean, he repeats things that he's heard. He can't keep it. Lord knows he can't keep a secret. He doesn't know what half the time he doesn't know what he's saying. I think you're right. Like he's not necessarily purposely doing it. But what did he say when about the eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio? He was like, "Well, I saw it on television."
So or Twitter. So I mean, what is happening like at the moment with Twitter, for example, and this is pretty much 100% nailed on, is that countries like Russia, and it's especially Russia that are doing this, can issue unlimited government IDs, genuine government IDs in Russia and Belarus and legitimate IDs for fake people. And then intelligence agencies can just create nearly unlimited verified accounts on Twitter and give people massive followings overnight. So what you're seeing now on Twitter is you're seeing accounts that appear, literally, you'll see them appear in November 2024. And by March 2025, they've got something like 200,000 followers, verified followers. And you don't have to follow these accounts. They'll appear in your feed anyway. And they're just literally spamming white supremacy. Spamming it. The most divisive, horrible stuff. Because we know, Alexander Dugin, who's the kind of like Trump's strategist, ideological strategist, famously made the case that what Russia needs to do is to build on what was called active measures in the Soviet Union and play upon every single racial, class, political divide you can do. Find as many existing wounds in American society and actively try to make them fester. And it's just obvious. You can see that this is happening on Twitter right now. Again, account joins, white supremacist account joins in November. It's got 500,000 followers and it's just pushing the most poisonous stuff. Meanwhile, you've got online influencers that we are seeing actively paid by the Kremlin. Right? We know that that's actually happened. And even the accounts that aren't actively being paid by the Kremlin, what happens is that with their YouTube views, and I know this because I've spoken to some of them, the more nuanced the content they put on their YouTube channel, the less views it gets. But as soon as they put something on that's really chest thumping, that resonates with something that the Russians would like because they want to, again, find existing wounds and make them fester, then suddenly all of their views go out of control because basically all of these fake accounts are watching them, right? And then that's generating advertising revenue because that seems to be real. It's generating engagement, and so it's pushing existing people further and further to the extreme lunatic right-wing fringes, and it's happening all of the time right now. Both with fake accounts and real people too. And
he just reposts it and says this stuff.
But Trump Trump will see this, and Musk will see it too. So Musk is being radicalized as well. Musk 10 years ago, Musk 5 years ago was very different. He was no fan of Donald Trump. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Musk immediately denounced it and moved Starlink in over Ukraine in order to support the Ukrainian military, who are still, quite dependent upon Starlink as a system. Although if it goes, they're not as dependent as he thinks they are. And now he called a United States senator who visited Ukraine and said, look, this war is horrible. Basically echoed everything that Musk himself had said a few years ago. He called him a traitor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're a traitor to America because you've sided with a liberal democracy who are articulating American political values and being critical of the Soviet Union, right? Because it is the Soviet Union. I'm sorry, it is. And this is the irony of everything, right? So you've got these people that the whole identity of the American conservatives was sticking it to commies. And that identity has gone all the way through the woke movement, in which the woke were identified as being commies. And there are parallels between Marxism and wokery. They're not the exact same thing, but, there is an influence there. So, okay, fine. Let me give you the commie label if you want. But what you're doing is you are taking the lead from an actual communist.
Right.
From somebody who was trained, who swore an oath to the Soviet Union, who was trained by the KGB, which changed its name to FSB, its same organization, and then went to go on to control Russia. You are taking your cues from an actual communist. Yeah. There is the irony. You're siding, and commie, you're siding with a commie over somebody who is articulating something that's way closer to the kind of values that were argued for by the likes of Reagan, for example. You're taking sides with the communists over the Ukrainians. It's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable betrayal of the legacy of America, of conservatism, and of the Republican Party. And I don't see why people can't see this.
Yeah. Well, I was going to talk about education because we're both in education, but maybe we should. Well, because I feel this is another, again, Viktor Orban did this, it's this dismantling of education. And we are already we have been seeing for a while, there's fewer men going to education, fewer white men in particular, Black men, but also fewer, particularly white men, and sort of the definition of college, higher education as grift. And, we've talked about on the podcast, like grade inflation and, certainly, self-censorship and, threats to academic freedom. And what I'm seeing at my institution now is, now that it's a threat from the right, they're all up in arms about academic freedom.
Yeah.
So when the
all of a sudden,
threats, exactly. And it's, and my point is, it's too late now, but had you, sort of this relates to what you were just talking about, had you actually reflected on your own principles, during the, when it was, the left that was, more threatening. There's still plenty of threat from the left to academic freedom. But
absolutely.
when that was more threatening in the moment, they abandoned their principles. They allowed it to happen. And so it's pretty hard now to then, they don't have the structure in place to fight the threats to academic freedom from the right, because they allowed those to, to decay, I think. And then also, I think, again, that we have played into the idea that higher ed is a grift by lowering standards, by increasing, by, engaging in grade inflation, by accepting students into, colleges who weren't prepared, by, with No Child Left Behind, allowing people to get through high school, get a diploma, who are unprepared for, for jobs, for higher ed. And so, we're here in part because of the left, but we're in deep shit now because of the right. This is bad.
So, I mean, again, one of my favorite quotes is from The Exorcist. It's the you've seen The Exorcist before.
Yes, but who knew you'd have a favorite quote from The Exorcist? You said one of my favorite quotes.
It's Father Damien and Father Michael, isn't there? So and the older one says to the younger one, the older priest says to the younger priest, and they're talking about when they're going to go in and exorcise the demon. And the older exorcist has plenty of experience doing this. He's been in the room with a demon before, and he knows how to deal with demons. And as the advice, he says, the demon is a liar, but it will like to mix lies with the truth.
Mm-hmm.
The attack is powerful and psychological, so don't listen. And so this is this is what's happening. And this is true of Russian propaganda. This is true of what the right is saying. The right is correct when they say that a lot of academia is grift, right? They're right. We've pointed out a lot of grift in academia before.
Yes.
We know better than most how bad the rot in academia is. So they're correct to point that out. There is the truth. Russian propagandists are also correct to point out that there has been mass immigration into the United Kingdom of people from Islamic countries who have no intention to assimilate to the prevailing values of British society, and have covered up the widespread sexual abuse of young, usually working class white British teenage girls, sometimes younger than teenage. Forced prostitution, rape, that kind of thing. The Russians were also correct to point out that the civil service within the United Kingdom had participated in covering that up because they didn't want to be, and the police, they didn't want to be accused of being racist. All of these things have truth within them. Then is the answer. Then the thing that comes next. So you've got the truth. So therefore we found lots of grift in academia. So what do we do? Well, we gut the entire institution. No. That's not the next step.
Right.
Because the institutions are still doing a lot of good. Again, like you said earlier, it's easy to point out these negative things and be correct about these negative things. And it's easy to destroy. But once you've destroyed an institution, building it back up, even to get it as good as the level of it was when it was completely corrupt with grift, is very, very difficult indeed.
Yeah.
A corrupt police force is better than no police force.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I really do think we got ourselves into this, in education. Little by little, we thought that the base, again, sort of like the government, we thought the base would hold, right? We thought that, that people would value education, that the majority of students, that the majority of faculty, the majority of administration would value education regardless. And that we would, even if we inflated grades, even if we, we didn't, even if we cut content out, even if we overlooked unqualified, unprepared students, that the core would hold without food and water, right? That we don't have to feed and water that because it is the eternal flame, right? We don't have to recruit men to college, because men will always want to come to college. So we don't have to worry. That's, I mean, I think I might have mentioned this, not to you specifically, but maybe in in one of our our Institute for Liberal Values meetings. But just, within a few months ago, my department was reviewing enrollments. So I'm in the psychology department, and we apparently have lost, percentage-wise, more students in a major of psychology than the university has lost overall in enrollment. Okay. So I'm just totally making these numbers up. Let's just say that the university is, 5% down and our department is 10% down. Again, just totally making that up. Okay. But they said, well, wait, it's okay because the percentage decrease is not minority students. We are holding firm on minority students.
Jesus.
And so there were several other people said, "Oh, that's great. If it were white, if it were minority students, I'd be worried." But we don't have to worry and it was multiple people who joined in on this. And I pointed out, I said, "Well, you realize that where we live, there's I mean, I live in a place where, BIPOC, isn't the majority, right? I mean, we're in a commuter campus. There's only so many people who are going to drive to our campus, and or people who, from the state, in state, who are going to live on campus. We're not attracting people from all over the world at this state university. So we do need to think about the white student. We need to think about, in psychology, we don't have enough men. Men want to, if we think about clinicians, men want to see a male therapist. We need more men in a clinical field. I'm not a clinical psychologist, as I always point out. But we do need more men in the department, and they're just like, oh no, don't worry about it. So treating this as if democracy doesn't need to be fed and watered, that the flame doesn't need to be, get more fuel, as if the values of education will, don't need to be fed and watered. That's how we got into this mess. And so I hope you're right that that we can make it. But so this is the last line of this article. America did not arrive at this place by accident or through the egregiousness of one man. The damage was done over time by a conservative movement that lost its democratic heart.
Yeah, it's not just the conservative movement, though. Come on.
Isn't.
It's not just the right.
But I do like the sentiment. It's not just...
Yeah, the right has lost its heart. The right can no longer be called conservative, right? It is not conservative. There is nothing conservative about the Republican Party now. Yeah, apart from maybe a couple of senators here.
Lost its democratic heart, which I think to a large extent the left has too.
Has too, yeah, completely.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they're weird inversions of each other now.
More like than different.
Yeah,
in many ways.
And yeah, I mean, I the left is at least equally responsible for this fiasco we're in right now.
But none of us deserves this, and I hope that people will, will continue. People like us will continue to talk about this, and that people will, will vote their conscience and, have difficult conversations like these, and that democracy will hold. So
I'm trying to think is there a comparable time in American history where you've had a president as wild as this one? I don't think so.
I think so. I think there's been a couple of, but they just, they had people around them, I think, that were, different kinds of people. I think, and one, and of course now, I can't think. Was it Buchanan? Maybe. Like it's like he gets into office and he suddenly becomes like less corrupt. He just like, you know, it's like, oh well, shoot, I just got elected to be president. I better straighten up and fly right. But yeah, I think there have definitely been other times. I don't know that there was quite this this much grift in in the federal government. I don't know.
I don't
This
know.
much.
I mean, all I can see is I can see a man who has been elected into power and is systematically going about destroying the state and weakening American influence overseas, making America look like it can't be relied upon, alienating its allies. I
think,
struggle.
yeah, even if there were people who were as corrupt or whatever, I think that I don't think that there's ever been anyone so crass, so disrespectful of the American people, just of the office
Of the
in
office.
general,
I mean,
willing to.
that debacle was Zelensky.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was an embarrassment.
but let's you know, I don't think Zelensky said anything wrong. I don't think he raised his voice. From my perspective,
No,
he
he
just.
was yes, he was the statesman in that meeting. He was the
But let's
statesman.
say people on the right are trying to say, well, he shouldn't have raised his voice. Well, okay, he didn't. But let's give them that, right? Let's say Zelensky was completely out of order, right? I don't think he was at all.
No.
In my view, Zelensky could have walked up to the White House in platform high heels and a bikini smoking a pipe, and that still wouldn't justify the President of the United States of America deciding to base his foreign policy on personal grievances rather than the best interests of the United States of America.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's what we have.
You know what? And any one of us would be called on the carpet for that kind of behavior. Can you imagine behaving like that at home with your wife and kids?
No.
No, none of us can.
I just think.
No.
I just like Vance just coming out with, you have a manpower problem. Yeah, we're in a war.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was pointing at him like this.
Yeah, it was, like middle school bullying, kind of elementary school bullying kind of stuff. It was embarrassing. It was certainly beneath the
dignity of the United States.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so can we end on a high note?
We can.
I always want to end on a high note. Okay.
No, I think American democracy will endure.
Yay!
I think it will. I think eventually, as things get worse, more and more Republicans will start waking up to the fact that it's not Trump. That it is Trump that is causing these problems, Trump and the people around him, and not the elites and not Joe Biden. And I think that in order to stay in power, the likelihood is that Trump will start to lean more authoritarian. I think that the Supreme Court will stand up to him.
Okay.
And I think that hopefully people will have the same kind of dignity that Mike Pence did last time around, when he refused to let Trump get any further with his plans to steal an election. Hopefully, Trump will not be allowed to challenge again, because he started to suggest, hasn't he? Could be here for another 4 years, right? Hopefully that won't be allowed to stand.
I've heard he calls himself King Trump in the.
Oh, he does. He had the White House. The White House was sharing, the official Twitter. This is the dignity of the United States. Sharing a picture of Trump with a fucking crown on. Fuck me. Do you not understand the tradition of American republicanism?
Apparently not.
I mean, again, this is not conservative.
No, wait, we were trying to end on a high note.
Yes, but I think America will endure.
Okay.
And I think that once you get past this bumpy period, then everything looks pretty good for America, actually, in terms of your demographics, in terms of agriculture, in terms of resources, and America's enemies are coming to an end. I mean, you think about the problems that Ukraine is facing right now, the problems, people saying that Europe's military output is nowhere near good enough, which is true, but the problems in Russia are much, much, much worse. Trump may be giving them a little bit of a reprieve now, but I don't think he's going to save them. I think that society's doomed. The military is completely broken. And, you will have breakaway republics, and once one of them breaks away, then the rest of them will break away, facilitating the complete collapse of the Russian state. China as well is also in real trouble. And Trump doesn't seem nearly as friendly towards China as he is towards Russia. So no, you are going through the most difficult period in American history, probably in your lifetime. Probably maybe even worse than the Cold War. I don't know. At least during the Cold War, America was threatened, but it stayed resolute, strong internally. Now it's being undermined by a KGB agent, literally by a KGB agent. So we'll see, but no, I think it will endure.
Okay.
Good. And on that note, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you for listening. Please consider donating to the Institute for Liberal Values, a 501c3 nonprofit organization at ilvalues.org. All donations go to support our continued programming to realize our mission to provide the skills and support required to build community where there has been division, to encourage free expression where there has been censorship, and to foster optimism where there is fear.